Hello, welcome to the second in our Finance Hour series. Today, responding to a crisis or responding to the crisis unfolding. We've got three fantastic speakers, but as is traditional, I will start with some housekeeping. This webinar is recorded and will be available on demand after the event. There are a number of ways in which you can engage with the webinar today, and please do put some difficult questions to our speakers. Please use the chat tool to speak to each other. Check it's set to all panelists and attendees before you do. We'll take as many questions as we can, so please submit your questions throughout the session. You can do this using the Q&A tool at the bottom of your screen. You can vote up and comment on others' questions. I'll post the most popular ones to our speakers. You can also ask a live question on audio, the equivalent of raising your hand at a live event. Please use the hand raise feature and I'll say your name and come to you with your question. On social media, please use the hashtag NHFfinance. That has two Fs in the middle. So, responding to a crisis, operational and business agility, economic turmoil, deployment of resources. We have three fantastic speakers for you today. Rob Griffiths, Deputy Chief Exec and CFO at Longhurst. Rob became Deputy CEO at Longhurst in 2015. He's been CFO since 2006 and leads the group's finance and treasury teams. He joined Longhurst in '94 and Rob has acquired a comprehensive understanding of the sector and wider business needs of Longhurst. James Hedgman, Finance Director at Dolphin Living. James is a chartered accountant, received his qualifications in New Zealand. He has acquired over 2 decades of international experience as a finance executive and chartered accountant with over 10 years in social housing. And Tracey Barnes, CFO at Sovereign. Tracey's an accomplished accountant, business leader with over 30 years experience. Prior to joining Sovereign in 2019, Tracey held a variety of senior roles, both in the UK and abroad across several multinational commercial organisations. We're going to hear a couple of minutes from each on responding to a crisis, and then I look forward to putting your questions to the panel, and let's see how the discussion takes us. There's certainly plenty of ground to cover. So with that introduction, Rob, over to you for a couple of minutes on responding to a crisis at Longhurst.
Thank you, Tom, and good morning, everyone. Just a very quick introduction about Longhurst. We're a Midlands-based RP operating across 50 local authority areas with just over 23,000 homes in management. The majority of what we do is general needs housing, but we do also provide care and supported housing services that makes up approximately 20% of our turnover from social housing lettings. In terms of our reflections on the last 8 months, some of the points I wanted to share was in relation to this topic, how resilient the business has been from when we look back to early March, middle of March, when we were starting to plan for what we'd need to do. The way the business and the team responded, we've been incredibly proud of all of the staff teams in terms of the one team approach with how people have pulled together. I mentioned our geography earlier in terms of the 50 local authority areas that we operate across, and that includes the provision of our care and supported housing services. Our development team during April, when most of our sites were locked down, acted as couriers for PPE, where we were trying to get supplies to different services where we were able to source enough PPE, but most of that was just coming into one location and then had to be redistributed. We've also had members of our office-based teams retrained to support our care and supported housing services at weekends. So the way the teams have all pulled together has been brilliant, really. The other, I suppose, reflections I wanted to just share was around the technology side of things. And as a business, we weren't particularly agile before March, but everything was set up in a matter of days to enable the teams to work remotely, and the importance of technology, which I'm sure we'll come on to further, has been incredibly important to enable teams to carry on working remotely. And then the final thing from an FD's perspective is that from what we planned for in March and April and what we stress tested the business plan on, it's been nowhere near as bad as we thought in terms of impact on arrears and impact on sales. By the end of this month, we will have hit our pre-lockdown shared ownership sales targets, and that's been a real surprise from where we envisaged sales drying up. But with an eye on next year, that's where we're constantly trying to see if there's any trends emerging, particularly around those high risk areas. So the discipline around, I think, stress testing has really borne fruit in terms of the approach that we've taken. Thanks, Tom.
Tom, you're on mute. Rob, thank you. James, over to you.
Cheers, thanks, Tom. Morning, all. So I'm going to try and attempt to bring a perspective from a smaller housing provider to the discussion this morning. So a little bit about us. So Dolphin Living is a housing charity providing homes for rent to working Londoners on modest incomes, in particular key workers. We are a build-to-rent provider, if you like, who aims to minimise rents and maximise the number of affordable homes, predominantly in and around the London Borough of Westminster. In terms of size, we're 800 homes in inner London, with a further 300 under construction or in planning. We also have a number of social housing homes within the portfolio that sit in the RP subsidiary. So we are small, but we feel we really deliver on our charitable objectives. What the pandemic has shown to us is that key workers make considerable contribution to our society, yet they struggle to get appropriate and affordable housing on the salaries that they earn, particularly in central London, where they are priced out of the market on their salaries. These are the people that we seek to provide housing for. So COVID-19 and the impacts on our business. We remain a strong and financially secure organisation, but like Rob's summary, in many respects, nothing has changed since the pandemic hit and lockdown one. Our arrears position has grown a little bit, but marginal, but still representing about 3% of our rent roll. So we're comfortable with that at this stage. We, like all other housing associates, and we're monitoring this really closely. We were expecting an upsurge once the furlough scheme was to end, but obviously the extension is helped with that. So we're on a watching brief. We've really actively sought out our tenants and communicated with them through various channels, and that's really worked well. Some have come to us with some issues and fallen into arrears, but we've talked to them, we've made arrangements, and that's working really well. So the traditional communication channels, be it email, tenant forums, all that sort of stuff, is actually working quite well. Having reforecasted our year-end position recently, we've seen a small uplift in our surplus, and that in the main is due to underspend in responsive repairs and planned maintenance. We had quite a considerable catch up in Q2 once lockdown sort of ended, but we're still forecasting a lower spend for this year. Ultimately, they'll probably be caught up next year. From an operational perspective, the transition to home working went really well. All the staff had the ability to work from home for some time, but the first time we properly tested it was week one, if you like, and it was fine. And the staff initially really embraced that, and like Rob, they worked really hard to deliver a really high level of service. I think as time has gone by, some staff have struggled, admittedly. Their own personal situation, working out of a kitchen, flat sharing, those sort of circumstances have really, over time, has really made them struggle a little bit. But we've put in place some elements to help with them, including opening the office a couple of months ago. So some staff are going in once a week, and that sort of helped that sort of situation. In terms of infrastructure, we issued laptops to everyone within a couple of weeks. Some already had them, but I think that's helped. They have a consistent platform. We've revisited our IT strategy and we're implementing changes now. We're moving away from a server-based platform, which we currently still have, to a more cloud-based operation. We're looking at different ways of working, the way we communicate. As Rob said, the tech is playing a real part in this transition period to working from home. And there's a real appetite for that and the flexibility around working and that life balance. Other challenges, we've had 2 development schemes reach practical completion through lockdown, so we've done virtual viewings. We're also looking at our office accommodation. We've got a lease that's expiring imminently, and we're looking at various office options. But also the real option is to continue to work from home until we find what we really need. So overview, I think at this juncture, I think we're really quite happy where we're at. I think we're well placed to ride the pandemic out, and indeed, if any economic fallout does prevail, that, you know, we're in good shape to actually addressing issues going forward. We look forward to the U-shape, if not the V-shape recovery in the next 12 to 18 months. Thanks, Tom.
James, thank you. You remind me of our financial plans back in April, where we did a U-shape, a V-shape, pretty much every letter of the alphabet, and they were all wrong. But that's life. Tracey, is everything as jolly at Sovereign as it sounds it is at Longhurst and Dolphin?
Broadly speaking, I would say absolutely, yes. A lot of very similar themes to the ones that Rob and James have actually talked to you about already. So I don't plan to kind of repeat that. You know, there was a question actually that Tom asked us before we came on air, so to speak, about isn't it actually easy in terms of responding to a crisis, and we didn't actually get into answering it, but I must admit that, so from my perspective, I think it has been easy, and it's been easy because this, you know, tends to focus the mind. You know, of course, the business is going to continue to do absolutely everything it can, and there have been many examples right across the business, across all of the different departments, in terms of the fantastic creative and pragmatic ways that people have gone out of their way to actually maintain really good services to residents. But what I'm particularly pleased about is the way that we've actually seen a few opportunities that show that people are actually prepared to be open to embracing new ways of working. And I think that's really exciting for the future. And certainly that's one of the things that we have been looking to try to focus on in Sovereign, is actually just hold on to those nuggets of gold that we found in terms of new possibilities, and look to see how we can actually codify them into our DNA for the future. A couple of examples of that. We had already worked on a revised strategy in terms of our community efforts. And what we did was very quickly just look to fast forward some aspects of those community efforts, focused, for instance, in terms of providing funding to help local charities to feed vulnerable people. We also have created a partnership with Womankind to provide support as domestic abuse has risen during lockdown. So we got a number of examples like that. Another one is we had an intent to provide support for people in terms of helping them to manage their own finances domestically. And so we've been putting support into that. Rob and James have talked already about how important it was to getting off to a fast start by actually leveraging IT, and Sovereign was no exception to that. And I think we all have been very pleasantly surprised as to how quickly and how sustainably that has actually got into a standard way of working. And what that's done for Sovereign is it's awakened a real desire to speed up that digitalization. Certainly as someone who's relatively new into the sector, it feels as though we've got quite a lot of opportunity to catch up in that space, particularly for our residents, but also for employees. And I think this is the kick up the backside, so to speak, to make sure that we speed up on that journey. And we've also had to think about the different ways to engage our employees. We've encouraged a number of cross-functional projects, just trying to find different ways of being able to fix some thorny problems, particularly at the frontline services around repairs and handling complaints. And instead of running it through more formal project programs, we've been trying to get small groups of people from the frontline functions to actually bring to life the ideas that were already there in the organization that they've never really had the support for before, and just try it out and see what actually works, and then start to think about how you actually systematize that across the organization. In finance, we actually had a very successful virtual conference. We had planned to have a physical conference, but actually lockdown got in the way of that. So we turned it into a series of bite-sized chunks over an 8-week period. And it was a fantastic way of really improving the engagement across the teams. And I'm just amazed at everyone's creativity in that and how much they learned. Lastly, we've made great progress also in terms of actually developing out some of our strategic programs. We've had to be choiceful about how many we're actually looking at, but actually the virtual working has not been a barrier to getting proverbial heads together in terms of actually working out how we deliver our corporate plan. And proof of that in one respect was confirmed recently by the latest S&P affirmation of our A+ rating, and that was great news to us, and a ringing endorsement for our longer term outlook. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Tracey, and thanks for sort of ending that on a upbeat note. I think that for all of us, there's a danger of thinking that survival is it, and yes, we've survived. Congratulations, pat ourselves on the back. We can deal with any crisis. So we've got some questions coming in from our audience, which is fantastic. Before we go to those, which touch on some great themes picked out from your little introductions, I just want to ask you, what hasn't gone well? And where have you had to make sacrifices in your corporate strategy in order to keep the show on the road? And let's go back in the same order again. So Rob.
I don't think we would say that we've had to sacrifice anything from our corporate strategy. There's elements within our corporate strategy that we now feel more passionately about. We launched an Improving Life strategy last November with a focus on a couple of themes, and financial resilience and economic well-being being key pillars within that. And certainly with what Tracey's just said, and James, in terms of contact with customers and looking to provide support where it's needed, we've adopted similar approaches. We've put in place hardship funds, and we made sure that we contacted all of our customers within the first month to try and identify where more support would be needed, if that's through our own team or working with other partner agencies and community support groups. So there was an increased focus on those areas. We also, and I should have said this in my introduction, the work of carers has been something that we've been campaigning about, raising the profile of the work that they do, and through this this period we've really seen the benefit and recognised the value of those frontline services that are provided, and for rates of pay that are barely just above minimum wage, and we as a business want to do more on that. We've improved the terms and conditions for our care and support team, where we've aligned sick pay with that of office-based colleagues, but the funding structures for care and supported housing services need to improve to enable businesses to do that, so it's not a race to the bottom. I suppose the area for us that was most challenging early on, and I referenced the access to PPE, that for a month or so our procurement team was solely focused on trying to make sure that we'd got sufficient supplies, which we were able to maintain, and getting those supplies delivered across all the facilities that we operated was logistically a challenge. I'm not sure we could have done anything different on that, and we've now had time over the summer to make sure that we're better prepared, and certainly the supply chain is better. But some of the work the procurement team have been doing around that is ensuring that we know where the supplies are coming from, and that any issues around the labour that goes into those PPE supplies is sourced correctly. So I would say the main challenge we had operationally was around that. The other areas, I guess, that we had to I suppose very quickly get to grips with was around the technology, and as I said, we weren't particularly agile as a business to start off with, but that has gone a lot better than we thought. We also digitized some services to frontline support workers as well, and that the speed of change around that would probably have been something that would have taken a year to have got done, and we did it in a matter of weeks. So I'm not sure I've completely answered the question there, Tom, but certainly for us, the first month, 6 weeks, access to PPE and maintaining staffing levels at the right levels as well.
Yeah. And James, have you had to sort of make any trade-offs with your corporate strategies over the last couple of months?
I'd echo Rob's comments, actually. We're actually quite positive about the future, and both at board level and exec level. Interestingly, we had a strategy day over a Zoom call with the board 6 weeks ago, and our plans haven't changed. We continue to grow, and we want to grow, and we'll be actively looking at funding next year. So from a strategic perspective, I don't think there's been much impact. From an operational perspective, I sort of touched on, I guess the biggest challenge for us is gauging people's engagement at home in terms of the staff. As I said, we're all right in it together and working really well. But over time, I think gauging people's their engagement with work has been difficult. As I touched on, people working by themselves at home have really struggled. So there's health and wellbeing issues that we're probably we have addressed that need a clear focus, and probably going forward as well. So the way we work will need to accommodate that as well. But generally, we're positive.
Thanks, James. Tracey, I think it's time we should answer some of our audience questions. You touched on the work you've been doing with around the field of domestic violence. We've got an anonymous question come in, which sort of expands on this perhaps. Have you found you've been collaborating more with local community and grassroots groups in responding to the crisis, like food banks and volunteer groups?
Yes, absolutely. I mentioned in my introduction that we'd recently revisited our strategy for community funding, and that had come more to the front in terms of looking to actively seek out partnerships in the different locales that we're actually we've already got our homes to make sure that we're sort of maximising the impact in those for those particular communities, and lockdown simply accelerated us actually implementing some parts of those, and you know, the team looked to see what was going to be most relevant, and domestic abuse and hunger and homelessness were the three key themes that came out. So that's what we were very pleased to actually start to mobilise those much more actively.
Thanks, Tracey. And James, I'll ask you to pick up on the same if you're happy, but also just to touch on a theme Rob mentioned, and another anonymous question we've had in, which is about challenges in our frontline staff, such as obtaining PPE, managing repairs, and facilitating the well-being of residents.
Sorry. Yeah, so as I mentioned, we had a couple of schemes come online during lockdown, and we did virtual lettings initially with reasonable success. But since restrictions were relaxed, those frontline staff are out and about and mixing. So, you know, we're just reinforcing, you know, government's advice around social distancing policy and so forth, and implementing that. We you know, we provide PPE where they want it. We encourage them to actually use it, whether they do or not. You know, they're out on site. It's hard to tell, but you know, they're engaging, and they're and I think they're enjoying it as well, being out and about and meeting people, that human contact, which I think has been missing for a number of them. Generally, our frontline staff are quite engaging people, so I think they're enjoying that process and having that back. But yeah, we're looking after them as much as we can. You know, we do have a duty of care to them.
Thanks, James. Rob, you touched on technology, and Andy has put a question to us here, which I'll just read out. At the same time as we as businesses have increased the use of IT, we've had to rely much more on direct contact by phone to our customers. Has anyone had any digital IT success in terms of the interface with customers?
Okay, thanks, Tom, and thanks, Andy, for that question. We've certainly had success in terms of the level of contact that we've had with our customers, and building up a better picture of our customers in terms of demographics, and as I said, the vulnerable customers that do need the support, and you know, the positive feedback we've had from both customers and family members for that ongoing contact has been something that you know, we're going to carry on maintaining. We haven't, in terms of IT interfaces, developed an approach yet where it's a face-to-face contact over Zoom or other video call facility. It has been continuing to be through telephone calls, but that would be something that we'd look to prioritise for the future. But the key thing for us is that we've definitely been able to identify those customers that need support, and having access to that information will help us shape services better in the future.
Thank you, Rob. And Tracey, you were describing what sounded a very agile way of problem solving in the business. Is this field of customer interface something where you've seen change over the last couple of months?
Yes, in terms of that sort of agile working, it was a very conscious experiment to actually sort of, you know, move away from a more formal way of actually looking at trying to make process improvements, to actually sort of giving some freedom to junior frontline people, and most importantly a cross-functional group of people, to kind of look almost 360 at a very specific problem, like for instance customer complaints, and actually just to try something new. It's been very engaging for the people who've actually been involved in the projects, and we've now got lots more people who are really keen to get involved in that way of working. And it's allowed us to have a sort of safe way to kind of try different things. You know, I'm a great believer in actually trying and you know, learning from doing. So we're not expecting that everything is going to work first time around, but actually just the experience of being able to actually get things done. It provides its own energy and positivity, and helps more people in the organization to actually feel that they can genuinely make a difference. And that, we hope, is going to set off a whole series of fires and become a much more formal way of working across the whole business.
Absolutely. And yeah, finding ways to generate energy has been a particular challenge, of course, over the last couple of months. And Tracey, you've perhaps inadvertently addressed another of our anonymous questions, which, Rob, I might put to you. What was one key learning that you think you will carry forward in the future?
Okay, so if I had to pick one out, I think in the first few months, the speed of decision making that the business went through, and Tracey just referenced this around, you won't get everything right first time, or words to that effect. I think for us, we've looked back and there's been some real positives around making decisions quicker. I think as a business and a sector more generally, we're not necessarily renowned for making quick decisions. We will, quite rightly in some cases, spend time doing research and making sure that we're looking at things in detail. But we didn't have the luxury of that early on. And I gave the example of digitizing some of our frontline care and support services. I think in the future we will try to capture some of the benefits of working in a different way, where we make decisions quickly, and partway through projects, if we need to change and adapt what we're doing, then we'll use the learning from the early part to make sure we get the best outcomes in the end. So for me, that would be one of the main learnings. There's lots I think we could mention, but that one I think sticks out.
Thank you, Robin. Sounds like something that could be quite transformational into the long term, that kind of sort of deep change. James, I'd like to put a different question to you, the one that's at the top of our list, has been voted up by our attendees today. We're starting to see some more direct service disruption now through staff testing positive for COVID. Does the panel see this as an emerging risk as we move into the winter months? And James, I'll ask you this question, and then Tracey, I'll ask the same to you as well.
I certainly do, yeah. And speaking from personal experience, my son has been put into isolation last Friday as his whole class. So my wife and I, both working full time, have to do shift work. So it's real, absolutely, and I think that will be ongoing. In the winter months, absolutely. I think it will really test, I guess, our staffing levels. I mean, we're a small team, and you know, we do cover each other for a number of tasks and things, but there may well come a point where there will be a shortage. So, you know, we need to plan for that. But yeah, certainly over the winter, I think this may well be an issue.
And Tracey?
Yes, I would agree. You know, with around 2,000 employees in our organisation, as you can imagine, we've had a few cases already. And it is something that we are continuing to actively monitor. You know, we put the safety of employees up there very, very high. and are very sensitive to, but particularly in terms of frontline resources and not wanting to compromise on their safety, nor indeed the safety of the residents that they're actually supporting. But so far, our sort of contingency processes seem to be holding up pretty well, and it's not yet been an area that where we've had to make significant compromises in terms of the kind of services that we're offering. And let's hope that this news about the new vaccine and the others to come is going to provide that well-needed relief as quickly as possible.
Indeed, may we all echo that. We've got a few more questions to answer, but there's plenty of time, so do put your questions through. Rob, the last question I asked you was about what you'd learned and things to take into the future. A question now that I want to put to all of you, another anonymous question. I'll read it out. In the understanding that this pandemic has been truly awful across the globe, there have been some positive outcomes in terms of how we work both internally and with our residents. How can we take the best bits of the new way of working as we look beyond the end of the pandemic, vaccine, and get rid of the worst bits? So we've had lots of positives how we've got through. We've heard from you all some thoughts about what we've learned. What are we going to leave behind? Rob?
So if I can give a couple of examples of what we're going to leave behind, and we've already made a decision within the business of working in a different way in the future, and I think it's really important that we capture that and document that so that we don't slip back into old habits next year if we're in a position where the vaccine's in place. I mentioned that we are geographically spread, and as a leadership team and management team, we often used to spend time traveling to meetings that, on reflection now, weren't all needed to be meetings where we were all sat together physically around the table. So what we've been able to achieve with video calls will change the way that we work in the future, and we will be carrying on that approach. We'll be making it very clear during our next budget round that our travel budget going forward will look very different as a business. And we had a strategy day with the board at the beginning of October where we were looking at developing an environmental strategy, and as our company mileage for the last financial year topped nearly 1.5 million miles. That's a huge carbon footprint that we're creating in terms of travel. And whilst we're moving towards greener vehicles, there's also lost time for staff traveling to meetings, and it's getting the balance right in the future, because one of the things that hasn't worked as well is the lack of physical meetings. So getting the balance right where we meet face to face in the future has a real purpose, and we make the most use of that time. But for other shorter meetings, we mix things up and absolutely carry on using video conferencing facilities. So that, without going into other bits, that's my one. I'll let James and Tracey come up with some other ones as well.
Well, I think we can all agree that the webinar is a fantastic forum and should be continued indefinitely. Tracey, to you next. What do you think you might leave behind?
Very, very similar to Rob's sentiments. The first thing that I wrote down was meetings. I think that this has provided an opportunity to actually liberate people to actually do some thinking, rather than actually sort of rocking up to meetings and spending time together but not actually being clear on outcomes. I don't think that we're going to banish meetings altogether, and I don't think there's any reason to, but I think that getting people to to really be a lot clearer on why they're actually getting together, and making sure that they're making the best use of everybody's time within those meetings, I think is really important. I think the another thing that Rob had touched on was actually around flexibility of working. I think that we certainly one observation that I've made already within Sovereign, but I would make of probably more generally of housing associations, is that there's been a lot more homogeneity, a lot smaller number of ways of working prior to lockdown, and I think that now we are recognizing that actually getting the best out of everybody opens up that possibility of working in different ways. So thinking more creatively about rota structures, about extending working hours for certain groups of people, concentrating working hours for other groups of people, expectations of when you actually get together in an office, what actually is office-based working, all of those things, rather than actually reverting back to a much more traditional way of doing things. So those are the two key things I would pull out.
James, do you have any different perspectives on this question from Dolphin's perspective?
No, I'd echo both those comments that Tracey made. Actually, I was going to make the same ones. But, I think the 9 to 5 is all but gone. Certainly for us. With that comes some problems, though. I'm logging on at 8 or 9 o'clock at night. Well, not a problem, but it's getting that life balance right. I think is going to be key going forward. But it just gives so much more flexibility. I think people are generally happier with that approach. I get to see my kids more. I'm happy. So very much a fan of that flexibility.
Thanks, James. We've had a question come in on a whole theme we haven't really touched on, which is the office. This is a great question, pertinent to yesterday's news. What is the panel's view on returning staff to offices if vaccines prove effective? And our anonymous questioner says, this is us considering the societal impact on equality and diversity. Rob, a tricky management question, I suspect. And I don't expect you've got completely formed thoughts. We don't know about this vaccine, but I guess maybe you could talk us through your decision-making processes and how we might get there.
Yeah, and it's a really good question around that impact from an E&D perspective, and throughout the last 8 months, we've in terms of staff well-being, we've been maintaining regular contact to try and identify any colleagues who are struggling working from home, be that down to connectivity issues with rural broadband or loneliness, and we prioritised access to offices for those staff that for either of those two reasons need to come into the office, and we've continued to do that. Back in September, we got a desk booking system all ready to launch, and then we started to see the increases in cases. So our line as a business is that we are asking staff to continue to work from home where they are able to do so, but in circumstances where the broadband connection isn't good enough, or where from their own well-being, staff need some access to an office to be able to talk to a colleague, then we're continuing to do that. But that is very much reduced numbers, and that's where the priority is being given. And as long as the numbers are maintained at a similar level, then that's the approach that we envisage carrying on with. But they are very, very low numbers. As we move into the spring, and hopefully a position where we are able to get more people back into into the office, then I think Tracey mentioned it in terms of the balance, and similarly James, that we won't ever go back to the 9 to 5 and people working in offices, but we will still need to have people in the office, and some people may need more access than other colleagues, and it's just finding the right support and balance for individuals that we'll be looking at.
Thanks, Rob. James, I think you mentioned some discussions about your office and potentially the lease expiring.
Yeah.
I guess there's a flip side question to this as well, which is, if you're considering not having an office, what might the E&D considerations be from that perspective?
Good question. I haven't really thought about that one. I don't think things would change. I mean, we're operating as we are now, and I don't think there's any deviation from that. I mean, it's working fine, and I think our staff, as much as they like the social element of meeting up, are working functionally very well. Yeah, I'm happy where we're at, actually.
That's very good to hear.
But, yeah, I mean, our office itself, I mean, we are, as you say, our lease is expiring, and the space that we're actually looking for it's very different, from what we would traditionally look for. So that, the impacts of the last 8 months are having an impact, or shaping the views of what we need. It'd be more meeting space as opposed to desk space, for example. So yeah, it's and we will potentially, the fallback position is that we just work from home as we have over the last 8 months. We don't find the space that we want.
Extraordinary, isn't it, that's the default now?
Yep.
Wouldn't have thought that 8 months ago. Well, look, it's getting towards time to wrap up. I just want to pose one quick question to you all, which is, this has been an unusual crisis. It's been universal, well, global. Our residents, our staff, our suppliers, our lenders, our regulators, all been going through the same thing, and we've kind of all been in the same boat. That, I think, has perhaps made it, if not made it easier, it's at least made it less fractious in responding to this crisis. Where do you think other crises may come from that we might need to respond to, but for which this has been a good training, experience building process? So quick answers from each of you, and then we'll wrap up. Tracey, what's the next crisis?
Well, I don't know whether it'll be the next crisis, but certainly something that is very much on our mind is the race towards zero carbon. I suspect it's going to be on us sooner than we think, and I think that the implications are going to be more far-reaching and more costly than we think. Where I say that not just from a point of view of thinking about our homes, but thinking more specifically about the supply chain and the fact that they're all wrestling with how to actually get on top of that. So that would be my punt.
Wow, Rob.
Nearly got through without being on mute. So I was going to say something similar to Tracey, but I'll pick out a different one. I mean, we've had, as I'm sure others have had, cybersecurity near the top of our risk register. We did a business continuity exercise on that a month ago, and then we saw last week one RP has been subject to a significant ransomware attack. As good as all of our security and testing can be on IT. It's never static, and you may think on a Friday you're completely secure, but by Monday something else comes out, and that may well be something that just affects one organisation rather than something like this, which has been a global sector-wide issue. So yeah, that would be the other potential crisis. I don't see that risk changing. If anything, it will increase in the future.
Indeed, the last 8 months have only amplified our technology risks, right? And James, you have the final word. Where might the crisis come from?
Yeah, I would echo both those comments, particularly the sustainability and funding that going forward. Other issues, health and safety, ongoing, obviously, but addressing that, and state of the economy. What's going to be the fallout from the pandemic in the next 12 to 18 months? But yeah, I mean, those are all featured on our risk register as well.
On reflection, that wasn't perhaps the best question to end this panel, because we've ended on a gloomy note where you all started off so positive in thinking about how you and your businesses have responded so well to the crisis that we're continuing to live through. But look, thank you all for your time. It's been a really, really interesting discussion to hear very similar perspectives from very different organisations. There's something interesting, I think, just in that in itself. And thank you to our audience today for joining us and engaging in our second finance hour. Please note that in order to provide some certainty, NHF have decided to host the National Finance Conference virtually this year from the 16th to 19th of March next year, 2021, with a Finance Fundamentals half day on Tuesday the 10th of March. 7 streams of content over 5 days, and there are also 4 more instalments of the Finance Hour. The next will look at the impact of coronavirus on resident and housing association incomes and is on Tuesday the 8th of December. You'll be sent a link to join nearer the time by email, and if you can't make the live webinar date, all of the Finance Hours will be available on demand. So thank you for joining us today, and goodbye.